Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. You'll get 5 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Plus, enjoy access to the American Express Global Lounge Collection. And with the welcome offer of 150,000 points, your business can soar to all new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum, built for business by American Express.
The Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70. Alan is starting that time of year where he does the high school stuff and we get in the good guests. And we had Jeff Jones last week. We've got Brenden Schaeffer joining us this week. You know him from all sorts of places, KMOV or KTGR or who knows where, Twitter, Blue Sky. Brenden, where are you coming down on the Twitter Blue Sky split? Are you doing both?
I have Blue Sky officially. I don't know how consistent I am or am going to be at maintaining it, at remembering to open another social media app.
Mm-hmm.
I probably spend more time than I need to on the one. But no, I have it as a just in case for the most part. But yeah, I'll kind of as the population grows over there, try to maintain a presence. But there's so many of them, it can be hard to keep up with.
Yeah, and we get in our habits of as well. I check it every once in a while. I try to check it, once or twice. If I get a notification or something like that, I may go over there. So yeah, it's hard to break free of something that we've been doing for 10 to 12 years now, and a lot of good people over there.
No doubt about it. Yeah, and I'm a creature of habit, and so I've been going to Twitter for so long. And I'm not saying it's the most splendid place in the universe these days, but as long as it's there, I probably will be too.
Yeah. Well, speaking of habits, we have you on at the beginning of every year, and so it's been a year. How has this past year treated you?
Gosh, well, personally, it's been fun watching our young son grow up. He's 2 now, and so that's been a pretty transformative year in the home life. And then, professionally, just doing a lot of what I have been doing with the radio show in Columbia has been fun. As people who follow me know, I'm big into Mizzou football and things like that, so that's been fun to follow. Cardinal baseball was not, the most compelling necessarily over the past summer, and we'll see what the next year is going to bring. But no, it's been good, man. Just turned 30 since we last spoke, so that's the new watermark on that front. But yep, we're just making our way in this world just like anybody.
Yeah, that kind of hurts because I hit a milestone this summer, and it's I will, and it is not 30.
Not the number. Okay.
It is not 40 either. So that really kind of digs at me a little bit, but that's okay. If I have a heart attack in the middle of the show, nobody will be surprised.
Then you won't get the milestone. That would be a bummer.
That would be a problem. But yes, you said something about Missouri football. I believe everybody found out how passionate you were about that,
Well,
including the Missouri coach. So that was.
I thought we were talking about Cardinal baseball here. What's going on? What is this?
Yeah. I mean, anytime we poke the needle, I'm going to, even if I know nothing about the thing.
He calls it. All right.
Well, and like you said, there's not exactly a whole lot of passion and fire going on with the Cardinals these days either.
Yeah.
And so, but let's talk about what we have seen or lack of what we have seen. Going into this winter, we had the big press conference and all that kind of stuff. But did you really expect that sitting here on January 8th that there would, basically be literally no movement whatsoever from the Cardinals?
No, I thought at a minimum they would have traded somebody away by now. And even
Mhm.
when that press conference happened and we were kind of looking at all those big contracts like Sonny Gray, Contreras, Arenado, that was kind of the big three. I didn't think all those guys would be traded, but I thought one of them probably would. And when they framed it that way at the press conference that you alluded to, it was a surprise that day, but I kind of accepted it and said, "All right, this is the direction they're going to go." We knew that, they would play the scenario that money is tight and they wanted to kind of tighten up on the payroll and the budget, but I like okay, we found out the extent that they're really looking to do that. Well, I think they had every intention of trading Arenado this winter, and maybe they still do, but their best crack at it was the Houston deal that he said, "Nah, I'm not really interested in that, at least not right now." And Houston said, "Okay, we're going to go progress with our offseason." And that opportunity was gone. And the Cardinals are just kind of waiting, I think, to see what else might materialize. And they're maybe forced a little bit to wait on the rest of the market with that. But yeah, no, I don't think that as of, the beginning of October, I would have thought no movement whatsoever. But I think they're trying to finish the subtracting that they're looking to do before maybe adding on the periphery of the roster at some of the holes they might be looking to fill. It unfortunately, I like for fans, it's not a great environment, but I think it's a finance sort of angle, and that's kind of where it leaves them.
Yeah. Do you think it kind of surprised them that Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras both were not only willing to stay, but especially in Contreras' case, adamant about staying, to the point of changing positions? Do you think that kind of threw them for a bit of a loop, or they thought that, hey, these guys are going to go out, we're going to get something for them, and we'll reset, and instead they're still here?
I honestly, I would have to think that even before that topic got broached with each player, if the Cardinals had a ranking of like likelihood of wanting to stay versus
Mhm.
willingness to go, or maybe even insistence to go wherever somebody might fall on that scale, I think the way it played out is probably not too surprising. Like Contreras always talked about wanting to be a Cardinal, and yes, he wants to win. And yes, he had those comments toward the end of the year about what the front office needed to do to get him the help that they needed to be able to win and have a better chance at winning. But he's always wanted to be a Cardinals. So I don't think it's shocking that he wanted to stay. Exactly how those conversations went down, I'd be interested to know because, yeah,
Mm.
they've got the couple of catchers that are more affordable. And so they probably said, look, we're maybe looking to gear more toward that. But how much trade value would Contreras have had relative to the value that he can bring as arguably the Cardinals' top hitter the last couple of years that he's been here, and just shifting him to first base, which how hard can it be, Wash? Oh, tell him, Wash. Well, maybe it's incredibly hard. We don't know on the defense of it, and they'll miss Goldie because he was very, very good over there defensively. But like Contreras has been their best hitter statistically the last couple of years, and if he's worth more to you in your lineup than whatever you could get for him in a trade, I think it makes sense to keep him. And if he wanted to stay, all the better. Sonny Gray, maybe strikes me as more creature of habit. Went to the place that made sense for him, relatively close to his Tennessee home where he's from, and it's just one of those things where you just did this whole saga. Do you really want to have that situation and that song and dance again? With uproot your family, the whole bit. I think he's just comfortable where he's at, if I had to guess, and hopefully, wants to prove that he could be part of the solution and the team performing better next year. And then Arenado, we've known about his desire to win and how it's the burning passion, that it's the only thing. And I don't think it's crazy that maybe he would be the one that they would shop the most aggressively and he would be the most amenable to it. But it's also like it's not been framed as he's just dead set desperate to get rid of
Mhm.
the Cardinals and to leave and to be somewhere else. If that were the case, I think he'd be a Houston Astro right now. But he kind of, played the hand that he played with that, whether that was him thinking, I, want something better to come along, or I don't have to leave the Cardinals. So if nothing better comes along, that's okay too. I guess is fair to ask. But yeah, I don't think they were super surprised by it necessarily. If you had kind of made a ranking going into the offseason or going into those internal conversations with those players, I don't know if that part played out any differently than they expected. I bet the part about Arenado nixing the Houston trade was probably not on their list of preferences, though, by the time that all came about.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I think it's also fair to think that when Nolan left Colorado, he didn't necessarily just open it up to any team.
No,
There's a lot of teams that were winning, right? But
yeah.
it seems like his preference was either St. Louis or the Dodgers. So while he does have a passion to win, I also think he wants to win in environments that he thinks are good for him, which is completely legitimate, right? I mean, not everybody fits in New York or Boston or Houston or any place like that. We will see later in the winter if it gets down to it, that if the Cardinals make another deal, if he rejects it or not. But um, I think it's kind of admirable to some degree that he still wants to be here, even in a situation that's not exactly what he thought it was going to be when he's not only when he got over here, but opted back into his contract.
Yeah, and I can see that. I can see there being some variance on this and a range of what it actually is. And
Mhm.
without, we've obviously not heard from him throughout the offseason, and we don't really hear anything other than what gets reported. And so it's hard to speculate on exactly like how gung ho he would be to stay, right? Like I've said, I
Right.
think it would take a mature couple of parties in this, and Arenado is one of the parties, and the other is the team, Mozeliak, the front
Mhm.
office, et cetera, to kind of go back to Jupiter and act like everything that happened hasn't happened. If that is in fact what ends up needing to take place, that would require some maturity for there not to be
Mhm.
some awkwardness. I wouldn't say animosity, but I would say like, come on, that's awkward. We can be honest about that if
Sure.
that is the way that this ends up playing out. But also, like when you look back at the way that it's played out, there has never been, at least in the way that it's been portrayed, a formal trade demand like you have to get me out of here or
Mhm.
else. Again, maybe the Cardinals, I don't know, maybe the Cardinals thought even if like Houston wasn't on his list of top preferences, there was
Mhm.
clearly a belief that it was worth their time to go through that process to try to get a deal done with the Astros. And then I would imagine they were surprised when he blocked it at the end. And then there's, probably some frustration at that because from his stance, as I think it was Katie that reported, well, I might do it later. I don't want to do it right now, as though
Mhm.
he's Arenado's kind of waiting to see what else could be out there. But that's just like not the way that the league was going to operate. That the Astros had a role to fill on that team, and so they went out and signed Christian Walker, and the Astros were no longer an option for the Cardinals. So like it's been some push and pull, and I think the Cardinals benefit from that in that if Arenado stays, it's not as awkward as it possibly could be for somebody to
Mhm.
stay if they really were okay with staying the whole time. But also, it made it more difficult maybe to move him because if he was ranking everything out, it's not like St. Louis was listed 30th of 30 options. They apparently were decently high on the chart because Houston didn't rate, at least at the time that the offer was on the table.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very interesting how and again, the Cardinals haven't come out and said, "Hey, we have to get rid of him because we wanna get rid of him," either, right? I mean, it's at least being able to be skewed of, "Well, we'd love to keep him, but, financially, we just can't," that kinda stuff.
Yeah.
So, if it comes down to, "Oh, well, we have to keep him," then nobody's burned any bridges on either side, and we don't know what the back room, how they're connecting over the winter and through the
Yeah.
agents and stuff like that is either. But you're right. I mean, it is obviously going to be awkward, especially if the Cardinals then here soon go into the process of trading Eric Vetti or Steven Matz or both because they couldn't trade Arenado. I mean, then it's like, well, you're here and these guys aren't, and does that add to the awkwardness?
Yeah, because that's kind of the albatross then hanging around whatever the roster looks like. Because if you think about it, I think Arenado back on the Cardinals makes him better in a vacuum
Mhm.
because he's a really good player still. But with what the Cardinals are looking to accomplish, they want to see everyday Nolan Gorman. They want to kind of once and for all lay that out, and there's no there's no way to run and hide from struggles. It's just is he going to sink or swim, and it can be valuable to find that out. I think there are a number of other players on the roster to which that sort of sentiment would apply. But if Arenado's taken up third base, you can't do that. Do you win more games? Maybe, but not if you then feel compelled to turn around, like you mentioned, and start trading away pitchers that, to whatever degree the case would be, I think having them is better than not having them if the money is not an object. If you're just talking about, we know how many arms it takes to get through a season, and whether we know exactly what all of the roles would be to begin the year, like is Matz in the rotation? Is he a bullpen arm? Is he a long man? Is he just there waiting in the wings? Like, what does that look like? Who knows? But having those guys is better than not having that depth, because you know it takes a lot of arms to get through a season. But now if you're forced to pivot in a direction you weren't really trying to from a roster building standpoint, yeah, if that happens where you trade a Fetty not long after acquiring him for a player that obviously went on to be really successful with the Dodgers and Tommy Edman, but if you trade him a few months later, clearly things did not go to plan, because they traded for him knowing, hey, we'd have an arm for 2025 that would be moderately affordable, and we wouldn't have to worry about diving into free agency to fill a need, and we could do that for a somewhat cost-controlled way. But man, when the $7.5 million contracts are the ones that you might have to resort to moving away just to save money, yes, that is, I think that would permeate what the roster would look like, and that is an element of this that hopefully it just doesn't really come to pass in that way. But I could see that if Arenado stays and the Cardinals really do feel compelled to lower the payroll that much more than they already have, it could come in some ways that they definitely opened the offseason not thinking they would have to do.
Yeah, and I want to get into that idea of if they need to on the payroll. But on the other side of things, I mean, and we don't know what the market's going to be like for especially for Fetty, or Matz. But in theory, at least, those are guys that would bring you back this talent, at least somewhat more so than probably what Nolan would bring back, if you're looking to do the let's develop arm or develop talent. Doesn't have to be an arm, I guess. So in that regard, for the talent that you bring back, I think there's a case for trading those guys again. Now, obviously, if you could trade Miles Michaelis, I think that's what you do, right? Because it frees up money and it frees up a spot for you to put a younger arm in there. But I don't know. I mean, what this rotation looks like, this coming, April, and you're right, you need a lot of arms to get through the year. But are they going to be able to, develop McGreevy or a Gacefa or somebody like that if they have some of these guys in the rotation?
Yeah, and like on the point of what could they get back, I think Matz is more of a salary dump. I think because
Right.
of his, the lack of reliability, he's had some years with the Cardinals where his numbers have been okay. Reliably, he's not been out there for the 30 starts a year that I think they value. And so if you can get another team to pay down some of his contract, maybe that is someone you pay to just find a new spot for on another team. I don't know how viable that is or how realistic that is. I guess we'll see. Fetty, I think, is somebody that, like, I understand why fans say if he's a guy that's under contract for only 2025, and 2025 is not a year that they are pulling out all the stops to be competitive, then trade away those players and
Mm-hmm.
find out what you have in younger guys. I don't think that's how the team views it. I think it's been portrayed that way by fans. I think it's easy to understand why fans would think that because of what Mozeliak said about lowering the payroll, but like there were more words beyond that, which is where and he's had quotes in various stories across the offseason of we're think we still have some talent here and we're going to try to win games. Like we're going to try to be competitive, but it's going to be with a lower payroll. But it's not like they're tanking. It's not like they're trying to lose on purpose or even willing to, sacrifice some of the certainties on their roster just to get younger. It's a balance. Like, and I'm okay with fans who would say, all right, I hear you. It's a balance. I just don't like that idea. It's okay not to like it. But I would characterize that it's where the Cardinals are. They're trying to do a little bit of both because there is a world where young guys take a step forward and you keep enough of the veterans around that are the reliable type and you win 80 some odd games and that ends up getting you in the playoffs. And suddenly you're talking about, having playoff games maybe at Busch Stadium, whatever the record would be. It's maybe a far-fetched idea, but I think it's one that they want to keep in the range of outcomes. And if you go starting to trade away a Fetty and a Helsley, that's very quickly not in the range of outcomes. They want to at least allow there to be plausible deniability on this is a total rebuild, this is a tank. No, it's not. We're trying to win. We're just doing it with a significantly decreased payroll. I think a lot of fans look at that and say, well, you're kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth. And I would say, yeah, a little bit, but I also get it because this has not been an organization that has ever wanted to tank. That's not the way they operate. And I don't think it's going to be this year. It's not to say they can't sell at the deadline if they're out of it by then, but I think they want to go into spring training selling some optimism and some hope on, hey, these young guys, come see them, and you never know, they might put together a lineup better than you think, and we might be in the mix of this. They still, I think, internally feel that way, or at least that's the way that they want to portray it.
Yeah, I get that, and I get that the Cardinals are trying to it feels to me like the Cardinals are trying to have their cake and eat it too, and we've gotten to this point where if you don't commit one way or another, you're just gonna, kind of tread water and be mediocre and things like that. I don't think that they need to do a full reset because they're right. These young players are interesting and they've got a lot of potential. Um, but I also think that when you've come out and said what you've said at that end of that press conference and kind of set the table to, hey, winning is good and nice, but it's not going to be our main objective, then you've got a little bit of leeway and you need to maybe use it. If Nolan Gorman's probably going to be out there either at third or second as much as possible, right? And even if he's striking out 35-40% of the time, Jordan Walker's going to be out there even if he's struggling. And it just feels to me like if you're going to commit to development. You're going to commit to, let's see if we can make a run, then that's when you exercise the option on Kyle Gibson to have, a solid veteran rotation. You probably don't do Lynn as well. And you're looking at maybe some sort of addition at the fringes of this roster, which they still could do. But I mean, does that make sense that it just kind of feels like they don't, and this is something that I think the Cardinals have had for a long, long time. They don't want to commit fully in one direction or another.
I think they'd love to be able to commit to winning and having their young players ascend and be able to fortify the roster around them with free agents like they've always had the plan to do, but they haven't been very good at doing that or not good enough relative to their
Mm,
peers. So that feels like not an option. The TV contract stuff, not going ideally has created, a revenue question. Attendance has been down as a result of not competing quite at the level that they want and the interest in the team not quite being where they are used to seeing it. And so that's why they can't go in that direction, or at least that's the way they feel about it.
mhm,
Uh, Not being willing to commit to a teardown and to a true tank is absolutely true. I mean, it's just not in their DNA, and I don't think it ever will be. So, right now, I think Mozeliak had to say what he said at the press conference to just let people know, like, don't be shocked when all these guys that you like, we're not bringing any of them back. Goldie,
mhm,
Gibson, Lynn, like we're not in a spot to really elevate the payroll because what usually happens at the end of the season, they have a press conference or when they decide to have the press conference, what usually gets said is, yes, we think there's payroll muscle, there's flexibility, there's room to grow, etc. Well, when they always are talking about the payroll and this time it wasn't going to be going up, you kind of have to cop to that and admit to it.
mm,
But everything else that was said was maybe trying in vain, because after he said the part about lowering the payroll, everybody kind of tuned out. But I think there's the words that follow were we're excited about the young club. We got young players. So I think it's the pride of where the Cardinals, we don't tank, we don't lose. And so we don't really want to admit that that's where we are. But you remember that press conference. And I
mhm,
mean, the Bill DeWitt Jr. kind of had a hard time with the premise of the press conference was we've fallen behind in player
mhm,
development and we're bringing Heim Bloom in to fix it. Eh, Bill DeWitt Jr. would be asked about a question about that, and he would kind of bristle and be defensive about, well, no, our player development's pretty good. We've got all these young players. Here's some stats about, how many young players we had contribute. And so, like, I just think there's an element of the Cardinals have a hard time as an organization admitting that, things haven't exactly gone to plan. The record will be very honest about who you are and what
Mhm.
you are as an organization year over year. And so we can all look at that and say, yeah, they've fallen short. But I still think there's this sense of we didn't lose 100 games. We had one season of 90 losses, and we can explain why that happened with this, that, and the other.
Mhm.
And then to their credit, like, they didn't do it again. They had a winning season this past year. It just wasn't a playoff caliber season. And you can kind of feel the inertia pulling this organization down. And like, all right, we can't just keep trying to patch it up and win 83 games because clearly that approach, we're not winning 88, 90. We're winning 83 when we try to pull that off, and fans are not as enthusiastic about the team as a result. So, like, I I I can really understand both sides. I can understand the frustration of Cardinals fans, like, be about it or don't be about it.
Mhm.
But I can also understand why the Cardinals are approaching it this way, because they're right. Like, there is a world where this team wasn't terrible last year. Who's to say that if you take away Gibson and Lynn, who were fine kind of median level pitchers, but they weren't top pitchers. They were reliable, which was a heck of a lot better than what they had in those spots in
Mhm.
2023. But these guys weren't world beaters last year, and you subtract them. Goldie was underperforming to his contract. Wilson Contreras is going to play Goldie's position and have better offensive numbers than Goldie had in 2024. Like,
Mhm.
Wilson just is going to hit better than Goldie just did.
Right.
If you get rid of Arenado, okay, he had a 719 OPS. Like, Gorman can probably do that. Maybe he doesn't, and then you find out what a losing team looks like again. But they have to place a bet on him at some point. And then if it fails again, then you go, all right, as we rebuild this thing, we know that Gorman's not a part of it.
Mhm.
And you can list 5 or 6 guys who that sentiment might apply to. So I can see where the Cardinals are coming from, because rather than lean into the mantra that was coming into 2024, let's just patch up this rotation with trusty, reliable veterans who have walk the walk and talk the talk and know what it means to start 30 games in a summer, and we don't have to worry about guys getting hurt and all this sort of stuff. And to their credit, it mostly worked out. Even
Mhm.
a Lance Lynn who was injured pitched through it most of the time with the knee. And they got those 20 some odd, close to 30 starts from Lynn and from Gibson. So, like, it worked. But what was the ceiling of that? We found out it's like 83 wins and you miss the playoffs. Now they're almost pivoting back and saying, okay, to heck with it. If the bottom does drop out of it because we lean into younger players, at least we know which younger players are not suitable to be built around beyond this season. But that's like, throw Andre Palante 30 times and see what
Mhm.
happens, because he might be pretty good. Looked pretty good last year. Maybe the sentiment applies to McGreevy. Maybe it applies to Graceffo. But you won't have somebody go into another organization and suddenly they thrive, and you can look back and say, well, why didn't the Cardinals give that guy a shot? I think they're going to have enough opportunity for those types of players to go around. They don't just want to completely abandon the notion of having veterans, though, because I don't know that their farm system is deep enough to where if you get rid of Fetty, Matz, and Michaelis, you have the young arms to come up and, like, not drown. You might have a 2023 all over again where they drowned. So they had to go pick up Casey Lawrence and bring up Andrew Suarez and that whole Jacob Barnes crew just to get through the season. I think they're hoping that this time they're a little bit deeper in the farm, but they also want to maintain some veterans around the team to be able to give you that floor. Because at the end of the day, like, attendance is going to be low, but it's still going to matter, and they're not willing to just completely throw that away and truly see how far the bottom can drop out of the turnstiles at Busch. I think that all kind of plays into why they approach it this way, even if it does feel kind of half in, half out.
Yeah, I mean, that does make sense. I get that. I think it feels to me, and it always, it's always the way it is, that they weigh some of that stuff more heavily than they should, and some stuff less heavily than they should, or at least, in my opinion, which is not worth anything. But so I think that's where a little bit of that frustration comes from as well, because, I think a lot of people would say, hey, throw McGreevy 30 times and see what happens. You know, go ahead and bring Quinn Matthews up, which, whether that's a good idea or not, that's a different story. But, would you want to see what you have with him in the major leagues instead of seeing another year of Mats or, and especially if you could get something for Fetty. And I think that's probably, and of course we don't know what could come out of that, but I think that's part of it is they need some talent in this organization. And if that's a situation where they could get some, then it feels almost counterintuitive not to explore that. But you're right. I mean, they do have to have the arms to get through the year. I just think that they primed the pump to allow people for a disappointment. One of the reasons 2023 was so terrible is that, you go into that year thinking they're going to win the division and, they just were in the playoffs and all that. And then the bottom falls out. When the expectations are lower, those kind of seasons, not pleasant. And, yes, people are not going to show up, but I don't think it hurts quite as much when you have that idea in the back of your head that this is going to happen. And I think that they've had that opportunity by that press conference to, they did lower that expectation somewhat. They're just not going to capitalize on it by, again, thinking that they can kind of hold the line, which is, I mean, and they very well may be right. They tend to be right a lot of times. It just seems incongruous, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to view it that way from the outside because we see examples of organizations that do the bold thing of all in and win, and we see the ones that when they feel like they need to take a step back, do it, and then they can return from the ashes and win. Granted, for all the examples of teams that do it successfully, like the true rebuild tank, a lot of times it takes several years. Sometimes there's no light at the end of that tunnel. Like it's not guaranteed to have that. And in a baseball town like St. Louis, in our modern era, like can they afford it? Can they afford to be that kind of lackadaisical with the fan? I don't know if it's attention or if it's the passion, and they don't want to. You don't want to lose it. You don't want apathy. And I think by sitting in the 70s to 82 win total for too many years in a row, you could certainly have apathy develop because people want to see one or the other. But I don't think Cardinal fans have the appetite for a true tank and a true rebuild.
No.
I don't think they do, and I don't think the team. I think the team views it that way too. I think the team knows that they've seen decline attendance for ball clubs that haven't really been too bad. I mean, they might not be fun every year, and maybe younger players like Mason Wynn that can turn into the next generation of studs, and you get a full season of Lars Nootbaar. Like there's a world where this roster can be very fun and interesting and exciting.
Yeah,
It might not win 90 games,
right?
Oh
yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons that even if the Cardinals took a step back, it would be well above those tank reset things of the Astros and the Cubs, because they do have a very good, a very interesting young core that they just need, maybe another piece or two to go with. Which of course that's what they thought when they got Goldschmidt and Arenado, and that didn't just pan out. But I think this team is going to be an interesting one to watch. I just don't, how, and I think that's more on the the offense and the defense. I just don't know about the pitching staff. But they also don't have, except for what we saw out of McGreevy at the very end of the year, if he can continue that, and then the Matthews and the Hints that are on the cusp. There's not just a whole lot that just screams out you've got to put these guys in the majors on the pitching side. So I mean, I get why they're doing it. It just feels to me like they have an opportunity to do something different, and maybe they aren't. Now we mentioned payroll a little bit ago. Cardinals have lost, I think I've seen $65 million roughly off of payroll. Now a lot of that, Sonny Gray gets an increase. There's some arbitrations and stuff like that, but they're still going to be significantly under what they were last year. Given that the TV revenue thing is settled and the fact that they've added streaming involved with that, I know attendance is going to be lower. How much are they overplaying the financial aspect of this, do you think, or is it real?
I mean, I think they think it's real. I mean, there's some uncertainty still to come. And like with the FanDuel TV thing used to be Bally's, they've resolved what they're going to get, but they're getting less, right? And so that's something they got to account for down the road. And like I even think back to when Sonny was signed, like how much were they aware of what could be coming? How much were they anticipating that on the revenue side where they backloaded that contract in a way that I kind of thought, if they had to trade him, they can assume Sonny Gray would still be pitching well, and he did. He had a good year. And if he had said something other than, yeah, I'm happy to stay, and they would look to move that contract,
Mhm.
I think it would have been very similar to the Nolan thing, but almost more compelling because Sonny is closer, I would say. He's coming off of a season that was closer to the peak of his career and,
Right.
and like his peak performance than Nolan, at least in this snapshot of time. Maybe Nolan has a great 2025, but like from a trade value standpoint, I feel like it wouldn't have been that difficult to get a team to take most of the Sonny Gray money.
Mhm.
And if that had happened, the Cardinals could say, well, we had him for a year, but we paid him very little compared to what, was remaining on the contract. Did we get prospects back for him? No, but we backloaded it to kind of allow ourselves to not end up paying him. Ultimately, he wants to stay, and I think they're happy to have him. Um, but like the structure of that contract, I even wondered in that context, like what did they know about revenues and
Yeah.
and everything as they put
Yeah.
that deal together? But I think they were hoping that when they signed Sonny and you sign Lynn, you sign Gibson, and you do the offseason that you did last year, that they would be successful. They would win 90 games. They'd be a playoff team. That would help revenues. Everything would be great, and they wouldn't be pivoting quite as hard into a we got to slash payroll. But I think with and are they overplaying it was your question.
Mhm.
Like, probably to some extent, and, they could hear me say that and say, "Well, you don't know what you're talking about," and I probably don't, but if you portray to the world like, "We need to lower payroll," okay, you've already said it, you might as well get your money's worth. Like,
Yeah.
you might as
Right.
well you might as well really do it because you can at least turn around and say, "Hey, we told you so. We told you it was coming." They don't get a lot of credit now for only lowering it by 60. Might as well lower it by 80 if they can, So, because then you've established what the new floor will be in future years when you say, "Hey, we're increasing payroll." Well, we're increasing it from what it just was. This is gonna be a 10% increase, but it's gonna take a while maybe to get back to the 2024 number that it was. So, I like how much do they absolutely need to be doing this? I don't know, but I think they're trying to brace to make sure the bottom doesn't fall out in future years where they feel like they've overextended themselves on contracts and it's for a losing team. So what's it all been for? Because then fans don't show up if they're really losing. Your bloated payroll isn't helping anybody. And now do you have to reimagine the model that has been sustainable success in St. Louis for so long? So I think they're trying to get out in front of before it really gets dire, is how I see it. But man, if they're really that dead set on moving Arenado just to get rid of his money, it is worth kind of wondering. But to your point, like there are other motivations to moving Arenado too,
Sure.
and getting a look at younger players is one of them. So they've positioned themselves like PR wise. Nobody's happy about the way things are going, but like I think at this point, if they don't trade Arenado, you'll have Cardinals fans who are upset about that because they have bought into what the team said it was going to do, which is showcase younger players. And they'll say, well, that's not a guy that's really going to help us long term by the time we're ready to really truly go for it and win again. And so he's here clogging up a roster spot. I actually don't view it that way. I think the Cardinals play better if Arenado's on their team, but I understand too the ancillary impact is they might trade a pitcher that is not as easily replaced as Arenado is easily replaced at third. You won't replace his defense, but if Nolan Gorman, plays more like he did first couple of years of his career, other than, it's kind of been a couple of rough ones, but if you give him I'd have to go back and look at, but 2022 Gorman, whatever that would be,
Mhm.
like if he continues to progress from that and plays third base this year, even if he's a slightly below average defender, the offense is going to be a 719 OPS or better. You're not actually going to have lost anything. So to replace that player with Gorman, you could get away with that maybe. Like there's a world in which you get away with that. I'm not predicting it will be what happens, but you could get away with that and not really lose a lot. Same thing with Wilson going to first. The pitching thing, like you said, like everybody's hyped about Quinn Matthews and maybe he gets his debut this year and we all want to see Tim Kent's. But like if those guys aren't quite ready for that step up,
Mhm.
you trade a Fetty, you're suddenly talking about shades of 2023 with pitching depth, I think.
I think that's yeah, I mean, it's possible, although there always seems to be, like you say, the scrap heap guys that can get you at least get you innings, whether that is, what you want or not is a different story.
Well, yeah, because that's
But
losing 90 games, right?
right,
Like that's
right.
the white flag. They don't want to do that this year. they want to at least make you think they're in the mix a little bit, because people will still go to the ballpark. It won't be as much as they used to, but as long as you're just kind of hanging around the middle, that's good enough, I think, to keep attendance from dropping off a whole lot more than what we saw last year.
I think with and we continue to talk about Nolan in the trade, but I think part of what's
It's the only thing.
yeah, to some degree, yeah. But as I've seen it, and it is a bit frustrating, is the Cardinals will say, "Yes, we want to trade him so they can free up spots," but they're not willing to eat much of that salary. You know what I'm saying? So in that
Yeah.
regard, it looks more like a salary dump, except for the fact that Nolan can control it, so he can they can't send it to Pittsburgh or anything of that nature. But it looks more like we're really doing this for the money instead of the high fluting. We want him to play somewhere so we can see what the kids have. I guess there's a price tag on how much they want to see what the kids have, and it's 30 million or whatever the case may be. I don't know. I agree. I'm a big Nolan fan, so I want him to be on this team next year. And I think there may be ways to kind of make things work. And not easily, of course, um, but it's just a bit frustrating. And it's frustrating that we've gotten to this point. Here we are, a week before winter warm up, and this is still it's the same team basically that it was when that press conference started. And it's I don't think anybody really even with the idea that there was going to be development, I don't think anybody really expected it to be this quiet.
Yeah, and like you can part of it is just the way it's framed in the PR of it, right? You're talking about the Nolan deal.
Mm,
It is a salary dump. That's what they're motivated by. How much we like if I started the offseason at the Cardinals are 60% motivated by dumping the salary, or maybe 70% motivated by dumping the salary, and that's why they'd trade Nolan. And the other 30% is being able to talk up the young players, look at a chance. We can finally find out about Gorman, and he sinks or swim, and we know what he is. Like, that would have been the other 30%, and that 30% still carries some weight, pretty legitimate.
mhm,
And I think it does matter. I just think the hierarchy we are seeing clarified, the money is what matters more. So if it was 70-30, now it's 90-10. Like, they got to get rid of the money. And if they don't get rid of Arenado's money, they're getting rid of somebody else's money, even if it's somebody else that would help them win. Like, that's how we're viewing it
yeah,
today. Maybe
mhm,
we get to warm up and nothing happens before warm up, and Mo says, "No, we're not trading Eric Fetty. Like, he's our number 2." And we go, "Oh, okay, we were wrong. We had it read wrong." That could easily happen. I personally would be surprised if they trade Eric Fetty. Be less surprised if they traded Matz. I think Matz is a deal that they'd be willing to make, even if they have to eat more than half of the remaining salary. If they get rid of 4 or 5 million, then that's 4 or 5 million that you save. And I think that's an area where you go, yes, a young player can step up and take that spot, which really isn't even the case, because Matz, I don't think as of today, has a spot in the starting five. Like, if you
mhm,
count it to 5, I think he's number 6. So, like, there are different layers to this depending on which player I guess you're talking about. And in the Matz case, I think it's one that they'd be more willing to move. But I think Fetty, I think, is part of a vision where they can find a way to be semi-competitive this year and have it go that way. But yeah, I think they didn't think it was going to be quite this quiet either. And the longer it goes, and the more clear it becomes that, all right, it is probably mostly motivated by trim and payroll. You do lose a little bit of the luster in that, and,
yep,
and the fan base gets a little bit disgruntled with that, probably. Whereas if they had traded him to Houston, you would have looked at it, and who knows what the players would have been coming back as,
mhm,
but you would have at least then had time to, all right, this is the current payroll. We've actually got some room in the budget now. Probably bringing back Kyle Gibson, or you're getting a
right,
reliever that people can be excited about. I think because of the standstill of the offseason after that trade got blocked, that they just feel like they're stuck. And I think they probably are. I think you
yep,
need other market pieces to be moved. Like, if teams want a third baseman, but they're kind of waiting to see what happens with Bregman, you're not going to be able to trade Arenado to
mhm,
those teams. And so that, I don't know how much Mo will say at warmup when he's asked about that Houston situation, but I don't think it's crazy to say that it ended up being a pretty significant roadblock to what they were hoping to accomplish by this point in the calendar.
yeah, I'm sure it was. Again, that is the risk you run when you start making a deal with a team that's not on a no trade list. but yeah, I think that's interesting. I just, I know, of course, Cardinal fans always think they should spend more, or at least spend better, if not more. And it has been frustrating that in the good years we haven't seen that necessarily that increase like we think they should. And I'm not saying ownership has been cheap, because I do think they spend more than a market like this normally holds. But I think they could also do more at times. But it's just maybe disheartening is the better word to say, that as soon as something goes slightly south, then it's okay. Let's cut $80 million off payroll.
Yeah, that the degree to which the cut seemingly is going to happen is it's big. It's notable. It is kind of crazy though to think. Are you like what do you think the sentiment? And like you're obviously a Cardinals fan, so like where are you at with buying what they're selling of or even with some of the stuff I've said tonight, which is like I'm not necessarily saying 100% am in line with everything they're doing, but I could make the argument on their behalf if I wanted to of why this actually is a course of action that could make sense and could pan out for them in 2025. Do you think fans at all are buying that, or are they going to have to see it? Because I think if April happens and you win 20 games and lose 10, everybody's like, now wait a minute, we got Mason Wynn, we got Burley, like everybody's going to be hyped up. But is it one of those things where Cardinals fans kind of feel like they've been told something for so long and now they're not really interested in what they're being told? They just to believe that a plan is actually a good one, they're going to have to see it play out with the team on the field.
So you're asking if a whole bunch of Missourians needed it shown to them? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I
Um,
guess that is what I'm asking, Daniel. That's good.
yeah, I think that's fair. And I don't know. I think there's going to be a hesitation. Even, I mean, of course, the last 2 Aprils have been terrible, right? I mean, and the first, well under 500. So even a strong April, I think there's going to be some hesitation. But you're right. I mean, they'll be like, there's that desire as a fan to want to believe, right? And then so you say, hey, yeah, this is that best case scenario that we thought we would see. Um, and it's just gravy from here on, and it probably won't be, but I think that would help. um and of course, fans are fans, but I think there's logical arguments for what the front office is doing, and it just depends on how much weight you want to give to those arguments, and that's different from each individual. Um,
Yeah.
I understand the arguments on keeping Ryan Helsley. I don't necessarily agree with them. I think that that's an asset that you couldn't move, and you run a significant risk by not. But I understand what they're saying, and I don't think that I don't think they're being irrational in anything that they're doing. It's just that they're just not decisions I would make.
And it's just so boring. Like they're
Yes.
not doing anything. So there are fans who are so fed up with the way things have gone that when I say some of this stuff that I'm saying, going, yeah, I can kind of see where they're coming from. People think I am absolutely delusional. Now,
Mhm.
some people may go, all right, no, I think he does have a point, but others might just be so dead set on they're just enraged with how, the Cardinals situation has devolved. Um, but it's like they had again, if you wanted to make the argument that it's not as bad as it feels, they had one losing season. They tried
Mhm.
to fix it. They signed 3 free agents. I mean, Mo said he was gonna sign 3, he signed 3. Um, they won 83 games. They turned that from 71 to 83, and that just didn't it wasn't enough.
Right.
But people have been tired of the Cardinals being in the middle or in the ways that some fans view it, just trying to sneak in the playoffs rather than trying to win and own the NL Central like they
Mhm.
used to. So like there's a lot of stuff that they could tell you and they could give you the here's what the party line is this year, and it's just I think it's going to fall on deaf ears a bunch, and you're going to get a lot of skepticism from fans until you see it play out in a certain way. And I think I almost feel like that's a freeing thing for the organization because they know that nothing they say is going to be like viewed with the benefit of the doubt behind it. I'm not saying they deserve the benefit of the doubt or they don't. I'm just
Mhm.
saying I think they're aware of like the sentiment has been like, people are upset. And so all they can do is kind of do what they're going to do and say what they're going to say, but they have to be right about their process being a good one. Um and maybe maybe it's one that's better than we could even imagine. Like if you ran the 2025 season, you ran the simulation 1,000 times. I think a few hundred of those, the Cardinals could still end up making the playoffs. And the good news for the Cardinals is that they only are going to do the 2025 season once. And if it's in the range of outcome to make the playoffs, maybe they get lucky and that's what they do. And then they'll be able to look back and say, see, there was never a doubt. We knew exactly what we were doing, and they'll look like geniuses. And if it doesn't go that way, then like you said, they'll have the cover of, well, we told you we were going to, kind of cut back and we weren't going to spend. And that could have ramifications in terms of our immediate contention. But what you have to look forward to is all the gains that we've made in the player development arena, and the better days are ahead. So I think either way, they have positioned themselves to be able to win on that. And for the people who, let's say they lose 90 games this year as a result of this new direction, for the people who are really upset by that, they can just pretend Mo was fired, because guess what? He won't be part of the team anymore. So you'll be able to, as the Cardinals, sell even more of the new direction of there's literally a new front office regime in charge after 2025. So I think no matter what, they're going to have a pivot point coming off of this 2025. I just, for some reason, am, at least as I'm finding myself right now, maybe warm up happens and I hear some of what they say and they don't sound confident in it, and I no longer am buying what they're selling. But as of right now, I find myself very amenable. I'm very open-minded to, this could actually work out okay. And I am a little bit anxious and eager to see, what a Jordan Walker does full-time, what a Mason Wynn does with another year of experience under his belt, Gorman, McGreevy, Palante, et cetera. Like I'm mildly intrigued. And honestly, if you look at the pieces that they've lost, they were high-priced pieces, but none of them were ones that were like, of the 5 best performers on the 2024 Cardinals, I think they're all going to be back. Are they not? Like, is there anybody that's on that list that is not going to be returning? Because, like, I don't think Arenado's on that list of one of the 5 best performing Cardinals from last year. Goalie, certainly, maybe he was fringe because he did kind of bring it back toward the end and the numbers looked okay-ish. But yeah, I just don't think they've, in terms of like high-end talent, maybe you say, well, we didn't have any of that. But I think the players that they are seeing depart weren't guys that you would say their production per salary was overwhelmingly positive last year. And so they're hoping that the people that take their place just kind of step into those roles and you don't really miss a beat. I'm not saying it's going to happen 900 times out of the 1,000 simulations, but it could happen enough times that this one that happens in real life in 2025 ends up kind of being okay, and they get away with it. I'm open-minded to it. I maybe more so than a lot of fans. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, hope is great to build rebellions, but I don't know about building a baseball team on it. And that's, and that's, I think that's what we're doing here is we're just hoping that everything goes right. If you want to be competitive this year. Now, if your focus is truly on developing and making this better for 26, 27, 28, then yeah, okay. I mean, I think that's, and if you happen to win as a side benefit, that's okay.
Yep.
But I
That's
don't,
where they're at.
yeah, I just don't know that they've,
Because if they lose 100 games, you'll hear a lot about 26,
oh
27,
yeah,
and 28,
yeah. Well, I mean,
right? That'll be
yeah,
the pivot.
yeah. I mean, and they're going, I mean, you get the right spin doctor, you're gonna get some kind of positive out of anything. But yeah, I think that's right. I think that's fair too. And I think we'll see that, again, as we've spent a lot of time talking about people that aren't being traded, if they go 14-24 like they have the last couple of years, those people become available a lot faster, I think, because you do say,
Yeah.
okay, well, the season's already, we're not going to get that, 100 out of one of those 100 that is going to work. And the Cubs or the Brewers just have a great run or whatever the case may be. But yeah, we will see. And you've talked about how boring it is. We have seen some winners where it's quiet, but at least those winners, we could at least, you know, fool ourselves into believing that they were actually in on this person or they might be in on this person or whatever. I mean, there's not even that to talk about, right? We are really
No.
limited to, is Nolan Arenado going to get traded? I mean, that is the full extent of what we can do this winter.
And if the answer is yes, ostensibly that makes your team worse. So
Mhm.
like the news that all the Cardinals fans are waiting on, I don't actually think, and I don't think anybody would argue, like it doesn't improve you. So the fact that this is what it's boiled down to, and like the Cardinals aren't even pretending to, like, what are they going to do? They're going to pretend like they're circling the wagons on some big moves. Like it just is what it is.
Yeah.
And I guess you can, when you say everything you said in that presser, like you mentioned, you can lean into that apathy a little bit, and people know the deal. And ultimately, I think they're probably just tuning it out, tuning out the noise of the frustrations, because they're gonna have a spring training. They're gonna have a 26-man roster, and then they're gonna play baseball. And if they win, I think a lot is going to be forgiven about what's taken place this offseason. But it's hard to even like muster to pretend to say, yeah, this offseason's been great. It's been exactly what they've wanted. Like I'm intrigued to see the demeanor of Mo and how he kind of approaches things next week. Because yeah, I'm not going to say it's like been an epic disaster, because they weren't really trying to do a lot in the way of productive additions to the team in the first place. So nothing ventured, nothing gained, I suppose. Yeah, it's just very weird um, to be in that spot. But like, they do have a pretty full roster. It just might
Yeah.
not be one that projects toward the top of the NL. It's just kind of, yeah, hope
Yeah.
and wondering if guys can take a step forward is going to be what it's based on. And if it doesn't work out, they've already told you what was coming, so they'll be able to say, "Yeah, I mean, we kind of told you so."
Speaking of winter warm up next weekend, I mean, one, what are you looking for when you go? And two, how much access do you think there will be to Heim Bloom versus John Mozeliak?
I can maybe tell you that. I think 0 to Chaim Bloom. I'm
Mm,
not actually sure if he's even going to be in town for this one. And again, Mo is still the front-facing
right.
um, executive of this, so I wouldn't categorize that as a surprise. Like, I don't want Twitter to then go, "Oh my gosh, Chaim Bloom's not going to be at winter warm-up." Like, I wouldn't. If you would have asked me the day of the press conference, I would have said, "No, they probably not," because the way that they positioned this is it's still Mo's show. And I think they're giving Heim that, additional year of he's on background right now. And I think it's going to be valuable, honestly. You think about guys that are thrown into the big executive roles, and they're kind of trying to do everything at once. Heim is focused on stuff that we're not maybe going to see front center, but I bet 2, 3, 5 years down the road, the Cardinals are at least betting that you're going to see the benefits of that within the team. And I actually think that makes sense. Like, a lot of people have said, well, why wouldn't you just give Heim the job now? Other than just saving appearances for Mo, why does Mo need to be running this the last year? Like, a patient approach where you say, hey, we've got infrastructure needs that need to be there needs to be oversight on these things, and we need to fix some things, build a foundation. Like, Heim Bloom can focus on doing that. He doesn't have to focus any of his energy on, I'm going to go, talk to the media at winter warmup. I frankly, I'd be surprised if he was there. And that's a case where I'm not even like, why are the Cardinals hiding Heim Bloom? I think it makes sense if that's the role that
Mm,
they want for him for this year. Um, I think he can benefit from it. The team can benefit from it. And then, as long as, it's not the same deal next year when he's the main dude, I I think it kind of makes sense. So yeah, I don't think you'll see Heim at winter warmup. It would surprise me.
yeah, don't worry. Nobody's going to actually listen to this, so nobody's going to go to Twitter and put it on there.
Very
So
good.
you're
And
safe.
and the fact that we hid that like 3 hours into the podcast too
Yeah.
helps. No, I'm just playing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you on the fact that it makes a lot of sense for Heim Bloom to focus on that development when it is such an important thing, and I think they've done a really solid job. Of course, I don't know the people. We don't follow front office executives like we do players, but just looking at backgrounds and things of that nature, it looks like they've made some smart moves on filling those roles, and looking forward to seeing how that develops. But that's a long term story, if it were. So, when do you head down to Jupiter, and what are you going to do down there?
Well, that's a good question. I will continue to finalize some of those details. But last year I drove to Florida, left the day after the Super Bowl. I'll probably keep that schedule because I'm not exactly sure even when like all the report dates are.
Mm,
Um, Frankly, it doesn't really matter a lot in my world because I just think that even if it's before an official report date, we know historically guys are down there. So.
right.
Uh, Being down there, I try to get down there as quick as I can after Super Bowl Sunday. I think that's the 9th of February. And so get there early that next week, and probably a couple weeks down there, give or take. Hopefully writing up lots of stories, doing a lot with my podcast, Be Shafe Daily, and YouTube channel and everything like that. And was able to, and I love, and we always talk about this, Daniel, but for people who have not been to spring training, I do think the most fun for a fan is before the games begin. You go to St. Louis and see them play a game. Um, I think the fun is in going onto the backfields and being able to be up and close and personal to the action and the practices and the drills. It's just like it's a very new experience and a new take on what you normally see at the ballpark. And I think if from what I've seen down there, that's got to be the preferred route. So that's when I'll be primarily down there and trying to document as much of that as possible. And for the folks that don't make it down to Jupiter, hopefully following my writing and podcasts and stuff can give you a little insight into what's going on down there.
You bring in the daily back to Be Chef Daily.
Well, and here's the thing with that. It's always been called Be Safe Daily. 2025 may be the year the name of the podcast changes. So if you have any ideas,
you don't.
because
You wouldn't
it is
take
one of
them
those
if I
things where
did.
I wouldn't take them, but I did think about that actually even earlier today. I was like, if you're trying to kind of brand and market this thing to be more of a consistent part of what I do than it's always been, it doesn't need to be called that necessarily. But now I'm 700 episodes into it, and it's like, how do I pivot off of that? I guess the answer would be you just do it.
Yeah.
But if anybody is listening here at the 4-hour mark of this Meet Me a Musial episode, you can DM me at bschaefer12 your ideas for what I should call the podcast instead. But I will say 2024 was the first year that I did 200 or more episodes of the podcast. So while it's not daily, we're close to at least like an average of 5 a week. We're not quite to that, but we're as close as we've ever been. So maybe this will be the year I get at least to like, I don't know, 225, 250 might be stretching it.
Yeah,
because I missed a few days to start the year. But you never do know. If the Cardinals are compelling, I'll have every reason to jump on every day and chat a little bit.
Sure,
so we'll see.
Sure, during the season, but you do need some downtime from this kind of stuff at times too.
In my defense, what was I supposed to podcast about 5 days a week this offseason?
No,
I mean, during this winter, it's been like, would you like another Arenado rumor? Okay, here it comes. Because that's about all we've had.
And you've limited
so
the daily to just Cardinals, haven't you?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
Yeah.
Back in earlier days, because like when I started it was January of 2020, and a couple months later there was no anything going on. So I kind of was willing to do some other things. Who knows? Who's to say? But like for people who, how it is, like I know you like Arkansas, so maybe you like Arkansas football, but you're not an NFL guy. And so when I start doing NFL talk,
Sure.
I've got a separate YouTube channel, honestly, at this point for that. And anytime I feel compelled to do that kind of stuff, I keep it separated. So I do. I try to keep the Be Safe Daily to just Cardinals, or at least like baseball. I am willing to talk about other MLB stuff to try to expand the horizons there. You'd be surprised how many Dodgers fans like hearing about, stuff that pertains to the Dodgers on the YouTube channel. But yeah, it's a baseball podcast for the most part.
Okay. Well, yeah, and you're right. That does make it a little harder in the winter. And also it feels like the media podcast realm is getting more and more crowded. And I see Katie has joined into that group. It gets a little bit. Are you really ready to throw some elbows and get some people out of your way?
No, not really. I think the beauty of it is the appetite from the true, like the Cardinals fans, the type that listen to these podcasts. They can't get enough. And if they like your personality and they think you do a nice enough job and they'll listen to you, then I think they'll listen to you, and then they'll listen to Katie, and they'll listen to Bernie, and I think it's great to have all that. And it shows just like the fact that you can sustain the vast number of various media, type of podcasts that are out there, just shows that the appetite is there from Cardinals fans, and it makes it worth it to do them. But no, my thing is different. Like you don't necessarily see me interviewing people very often for the podcast. It's kind of just a solo, and I try to keep it, to about 30 minutes for my own sanity. But after a game where there's just, I can just riff on something and hyper over analyze a single moment from a game. And for the nerds like me that really like that kind of stuff, it's an outlet for me to talk about it. And it's an outlet for those kind of folks to get to hear somebody talking about it that's plugged in and following every day, just like they are. So I think you find that the different podcasts fill the niche that they fill. I would say, if anything, like my type of podcast is almost kind of like what Bernie has started doing. But Bernie's been doing it a little longer than me. But I loved it. I love that Bernie's joining YouTube. And his audience and my audience will overlap, but they won't be identical. Just like this podcast and Katie's podcast won't be identical. But I honestly think it's good. And I probably gave you more of a long answer on that than you thought you'd get. But I thought about it. I thought it's because inherently you could be like, oh man, there's somebody else doing a podcast. I think it's a good thing, honestly, because it just shows how much appetite there is out there for Cardinal baseball.
Yeah. And you mentioned, doing a solo show, which is really remarkable. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do. I've done them once or twice. I can't imagine doing them 250, 225 times a year. But I think, you and Bernie are probably the only ones that do that. Is that a radio thing? Is it the radio background that comes out in both of y'all that allows for a solo show more than anybody else?
That's a good question. I think maybe it's that. And I'd be curious for Bernie's answer to the same question. But I think it's also just like it's the ego of it that, like, I think what I have to say is worth hearing, and it's going to be about what happened in the bottom of the fifth inning, and I'm going to talk about it for 15 minutes of the 30 or 40-minute podcast. So maybe you'll like that answer, Daniel. It's just my ego is so big. I feel like no, it's so I spare my wife from having to hear about it because she doesn't care. She's not a big sports fan.
Oh, yeah,
And so, it's just the kind of stuff that occurs to me to do. And I like getting to organize my thoughts. I feel like it's made different articles that I've written better because I'm able to kind of organize my thoughts and then go, oh, this is the way that I actually want to pick that out and frame that to write, an opinion column or whatever. It's also just a matter of like accessibility because a lot of times, especially during the season, if it's a game that's at 7:00 and it's over at 10, and whether I covered it or not, I'm at home. It's 11:30. Who am I interviewing at 11:30 to get it out for the next morning for the people on their commute? Like it's just kind of it's so inside baseball, and for a lot of people, I could see them going, it's not really for me. Like, you're not talking to anybody else. You're not. It's there's no banter other than the banter I can do with myself, but for those that don't find my personality detestable enough, you can get through it, I think, and listen to it and find maybe even some of it a little bit endearing for 30 minutes or so before you have to shut it off. But yeah, I think it's a funny point that, like, a lot of people say that, like, oh, I couldn't imagine doing it myself. I'm like, man, sometimes I start talking and I'm like, and I'll get comments. I'll get people that say, you're like, get to the point. I'm like, look, this is not that kind of podcast. If you want to get to the point podcast, I appreciate that you tuned in once, but you got to go find somebody else's podcast because I cannot change it. I can't change it.
Oh.
I'll try to make it better, but it's just who I am, and I'm going to ramble and stream of consciousness. But I enjoy it enough to keep doing it for now. So we'll make it happen again in 2025.
Yeah. Well, I am fortunate enough that Bernie is going to be on next week's show, so I will try to ask
Oh, I
him
might
the
actually
same
listen.
question.
I'll listen to your podcast.
No, you won't. I know better than that.
No, I'm going to listen. Ask him the same question though, because I'm curious. You can say that we talked about it, and I even said I want to hear his answer to just the mechanics of a solo show. And obviously, all the years of radio, Bernie does a lot of interviews. He's a great interviewer,
right?
But he's also, with his YouTube channel he started up, he's just riffing. He's giving you the stats, he's giving you the numbers and his opinion on them, and that's just kind of his style. I respect the heck out of it.
Okay, well, now I have to try to remember that between now and next week, but I will do my best to ask him that question. So anyway, it's been enjoyable as always, Brenden, to have you on, and look forward to interacting with you all year long, and finding how many different ways I can insult you.
You're good at that. You are you're consistent. That's what I'll say.
I mean, you gotta commit to the bit, right? So
it's good. No, I laugh and then sometimes roll my eyes, but it's all good.
If you're not rolling your eyes, I'm not doing it right. So all right. Well, again, Bernie will be with us next week. We've got a history moment from Rich over at Remembers right after this. So stick around for that. But until next week, for Brenden, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Hi, everyone. Rich Bray here with a look back at how the Cardinals signed Bob Horner to replace Jack Clark less than a week after Whitey Herzog told reporters he didn't think Horner would be a good fit in St. Louis. On January 6, 1988, after a long and frustrating negotiating process with the Cardinals, first baseman Jack Clark signed with the Yankees, leaving the team in dire need of a new first baseman. For Bob Horner, a Kansas native who had spent the previous year playing in Japan, the Cardinals presented a perfect opportunity to return home. Since winning the Rookie of the Year award as a 20-year-old in 1978, Horner developed a reputation as a productive player when he was healthy. Coming off a 1986 season in which he hit 27 homers and drove in 87 runs, Horner turned down a 3-year, $4.5 million offer from the Braves. After the Braves pulled that deal off the table, they offered him a 3-year, $3.9 million contract. Again, Horner declined. When no one else offered him a deal, he signed a $2 million contract with the Yakult Swallows of the Japanese League, where he hit 31 homers in 93 games. As a side note, 17 years later, MLB would pay Horner $7 million as a result of ownership collusion that offseason. Despite his success in Japan, Horner wanted to return to the United States. So when Clark signed with the Yankees, Horner's agent reached out to Cardinals general manager Dal Maxfield to let him know his client was available. He also told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that if Herzog approved, he believed a deal could be completed quickly. Initially, Herzog did not approve. Noting that Herzog hit much better in Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium than anywhere else, Herzog also voiced concerns about Horner's health, defense, and salary demands. Herzog preferred that the Cardinals sign Twins third baseman Gary Gaetti, but Gaetti told the Cardinals that he wasn't interested in moving to first base. Meanwhile, Horner wasn't ready to give up. He called both Maxfield and Herzog to personally express his interest in playing for St. Louis. That perseverance ultimately made the difference. On January 14th, just 8 days after Clark signed with the Yankees, Horner signed a 1-year, $950,000 deal with the Cardinals, with $150,000 bonuses for reaching 125, 130, and 140 games played. Horner had chosen the Cardinals over a 3-year, $10 million offer from the Swallows, a $900,000 offer from the Braves, and a $650,000 offer with incentives from the Rangers. Horner said, quote, "It's been a dream of mine to play for the Cardinals. This is an absolute perfect fit for me." After the signing, Herzog said he'd always seen that Horner was a much better player in Atlanta than he was when playing in St. Louis, but he was impressed by Horner's determination to show him he could hit at Busch Stadium. Maxfield noted that the team's interest also grew when Horner proved willing to sign for a single year. Unfortunately, Horner's lone season in St. Louis was cut short by a shoulder injury that ultimately ended his career. He appeared in just 60 games for the Cardinals, batting .257 with 3 homers and 33 RBIs. In August, the Cardinals traded John Tudor to the Dodgers for Pedro Guerrero. With Guerrero installed at first base, the Cardinals did not offer Horner a contract for the 1989 season. Instead, Horner received a spring training invite from the Orioles, but continued pain in his shoulder forced him to retire at age 31. In 10 major league seasons, Horner hit 218 homers and drove in 685 runs. He took more than 500 at-bats just once in those 10 seasons. So that's the story of how Bob Horner became the first in a long line of first basemen attempting to fill Jack Clark's shoes. For more Cardinals history, visit stlredbirds.com or follow me on Twitter or Blue Sky at Remembirds, REMEMBIRDS. Thanks again, and go Cards.
Widespread stance, arms out over the plate. Bickford from the stretch. The 1-1 pitch. A swing, and there it goes! Left field, way back! That's home run number 700! Pujols hits a 3-run homer, and he hit 699 and 700 at Dodger Stadium on September 23rd, 2022.